Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Rink-Side with Hits and Clips. Well, in this episode, we have officially concluded the NHL season and we are about to get underway with the NHL Playoffs getting ready to start this coming weekend. Well, before we break down the playoff brackets and who's going to be playing in each matchup, I just wanted to recap some of the past couple of weeks of how close some of the wild card spots were and how some teams were so close to clinching, yet they just came so short of grabbing that last wild card spot in their conference. Well, let's start in the Eastern Conference, where it was, of course, the Toronto Maple Leafs who clinched their division as they sit at the top number one spot in the Atlantic Conference, followed by the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers. Where in the Metropolitan Division, it was the Washington Capitals who not only clinched first spot in their division, but they clinched the conference, not to mention Alex Ovechkin breaking the record of Wayne Gretzky this past season too. Followed by Washington, it was the Carolina Hurricanes, who also clinched that second spot in the Metro, followed by the New Jersey Devils. Then in the first wildcard spot, it was the Ottawa Senators coming up big as they finished just ahead of the Montreal Canadiens. We'll get to Montreal in a minute, but just what an overall outstanding performance by the Ottawa Senators this season. They had such a remarkable run. You could just see over the past couple of seasons that they've been rebuilding and growing their franchise overall, and not only did they welcome a new owner to their franchise a couple seasons ago, but Ottawa, they're not just looking to build from the ground up and hang on to some of their past, but they're building with the future, with younger stars, with younger talents. You can see with Brady Tkachuk, he is one of those well-named individuals on the Senators organization who's going to make a pretty big impact going into the NHL playoffs. And not only do we have Brady Tkachuk as one individual, but also someone like Linus Ullmark. He is someone who's made a remarkable appearance on the Boston Bruins, let alone the Bruins not even making the playoffs this year, but just how he's been able to build his own hockey career and bring it to the Ottawa organization is something remarkable. And just below Ottawa, we have the Montreal Canadiens, my Montreal Canadiens, who clinched the playoffs after a huge 4-2 victory over the Carolina Hurricanes, which means that does end up eliminating the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, I do have to say, on the behalf of a Montreal Canadiens fan, I am just so overjoyed that the Montreal Canadiens made it into that playoff spot. However, I do honestly wish that the Columbus Blue Jackets would have got that spot as well too. Just remembering and honoring the late Johnny Gaudreau, who passed away just in the off-season last year. And so I think it would have been really great to have the Columbus Blue Jackets in that last wildcard spot. But just a remarkable season by Columbus themselves. And just below Columbus, we have Detroit, who followed behind them, followed by the two New York teams, the Rangers and the Islanders, then the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Buffalo Sabres, the Philadelphia Flyers, and then surprisingly the Boston Bruins. And if any of you were unaware, this is the first time in NHL history, in Toronto Maple Leaf history, since the Toronto Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup in 1967, the Boston Bruins, the New York Rangers, the Detroit Red Wings, and the Chicago Blackhawks all didn't make the playoffs, which is really shocking. But nevertheless, that is the order of the Eastern Conference standings, who clinched the playoffs and who was just short of coming up from that wild card spot, as well as who just might even be in a rebuilding stage at this point in the NHL. Well, let's look to the Western Conference now, and it was those Winnipeg Jets in Winterpeg who ended up claiming the President's Trophy in the NHL this season. And just below the Winnipeg Jets in second place, we have the Dallas Stars, followed by the Colorado Avalanche. And I have to say, I think between Winnipeg, Dallas, and Colorado, let alone Vegas, Edmonton, and Los Angeles, I think we can really expect a lot from these three individual Central Division teams. The last time Winnipeg made it so far in the NHL playoffs was when they faced the Vegas Golden Knights in the Western Conference Final. And I think what we can expect from the Winnipeg Jets this season is they're going to be very dominant. Now, they are playing the St. Louis Blues in the first round, but I think coming off of the Dallas-Colorado series, whoever advances in that particular matchup, I think the Winnipeg Jets are going to give that particular team a run for their money. Now over to the Pacific Division, it was Vegas who claimed the division themselves as they finished first overall, followed by the Los Angeles Kings and then the Edmonton Oilers. And I have to say, after the remarkable Stanley Cup final run by the Edmonton Oilers last season, I'm actually very surprised that the Oilers didn't finish second. I can't really say that anybody was ever going to catch up to Vegas this season, let alone the Edmonton Oilers. You gotta still watch out for them, as they are going to be a very dominant force as they go up against the Los Angeles Kings. Another first round matchup with the LA Kings, but this time Los Angeles has home advantage. And in terms of the wild card for the Western Conference, well, it went back and forth quite a bit over the past couple of weeks, as it was the Minnesota Wild who claimed that first wild card spot with just a singular point, landing at 97 points themselves, followed by the St. Louis Blues, who just trailed behind them at 96 points. As the St. Louis Blues, they went on a 10-game winning streak, but that did also find themselves in first place at one point. But with the Minnesota Wild not backing down, the St. Louis Blues did make the playoffs, which is great, but they do end up dropping down to that second wild card spot. Well, how did the wild card contenders turn out? Well, the Calgary Flames, man, every time I looked, it just seemed like Calgary would just never stop winning. And as an Edmonton Oiler fan, I did want Calgary out. Sorry, Flames fans, but I did want your team out. And as Calgary didn't even make the playoffs this year, Vancouver was not too far behind them. As you got to remember, Vancouver and Edmonton did play in that second round of the NHL playoffs last year. So I honestly thought that Vancouver was going to make another playoff appearance. Not only that, but the Utah Hockey Club finished right behind them, and that was their first inaugural season into the NHL, and I really thought that the Utah Hockey Club were going to make the playoffs this year. But it just seems like the more teams and the more talent that we're seeing in the NHL these days, the more difficult it is to claim that wild card spot. I think that the St. Louis Blues and the Minnesota Wild got very lucky this season, because I think that the Calgary Flames and the Vancouver Canucks, if not Vancouver, it was going to at least be Utah who ended up claiming those two wild card spots. So if you could just expand that wild card to another spot or two, I probably would say that it would be, if not Vancouver, it would be Calgary and Utah who's in that wild card spot as well. But nevertheless, just a remarkable season overall for both Calgary, Vancouver, and Utah. And then just following behind them, who they did stay close to Utah during a very big length of time during the end of the NHL season. It was the Anaheim Ducks who finished with 80 points. Well, just below Anaheim, it was the Seattle Kraken who did stay close to Anaheim as well during the season. But then Seattle started to fall down a bit as they ran into some very big competitors. They were facing a lot of playoff contention teams, and so Seattle, they just weren't finding their shape anymore. They just started to drop a little bit down in the standings, and they just ended up falling out of the playoff race. And just below them, it was the Nashville Predators, where they had a pretty good season themselves. They weren't playoff contention, but they did have a better season than I thought they were going to. I didn't think that they were going to finish 8th overall in the Western Conference, but just the fact that they were able to stay somewhat close to Seattle just means that there was a little bit of boost in them, but at the same time, you still had to watch out for Nashville this season. And then the two teams that just weren't in the fight this year, it was the Chicago Blackhawks and the San Jose Sharks. Two teams that have a bright future ahead of them nevertheless. My other friend Noah is a huge Chicago Blackhawks fan, and you can just tell that the Blackhawks have a great future ahead of them. If you caught our other YouTube video that was posted, I speculated that maybe there might be a future potential Connor Bedard trade. But if the Chicago Blackhawks can somewhat rebuild their franchise, let alone they still end up getting the first overall NHL draft pick this season, or maybe alone at San Jose, or maybe it ends up being Buffalo, but I really think that the first or second overall NHL draft spot is going to either go to Chicago or San Jose. But just overall, it wasn't Chicago or San Jose's year, and I think we can say that the Chicago Blackhawks and the San Jose Sharks, You guys have a very bright future ahead of you. Well, now we are going to break down the overall NHL playoff bracket and what my predictions are for what I think is going to take place and who has a great chance at making it to the second round. All right, well, we're going to go back to the Eastern Conference, and it's going to be the Toronto Maple Leafs who finished first in the Atlantic. We are going to have our first Battle of Ontario matchup in the NHL playoffs since I believe the 2003-2004 NHL playoffs. And what can we expect from both Toronto and Ottawa? The Ottawa Senators earned the first wildcard spot and they deserve to be in the NHL playoffs this year. However, we know what the kind of team the Leafs have been in the past. Now we know that the Leafs went out multiple times to Boston in the past, multiple times to Tampa, to the Florida Panthers, to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So we can't really say it's guaranteed that the Leafs are going to get past Ottawa. However, I think Ottawa's not going to go down without a fight. Ottawa's going to bring their overall potential and give the Leafs a tough time in the first round, nevertheless. As for the second matchup in the Eastern Conference, we have the Battle of Florida once again, as it will be the Tampa Bay Lightning going up against the defending Stanley Cup champions, Florida Panthers. Now, with the Florida Panthers adding Brad Marchand onto their roster after moving him from Boston to the Panthers, I think we're going to see a lot of offensive scoring from the Panthers themselves, but you don't want to count Tampa out just yet. Remember, they still got Kucherov, who's very healthy. They still have Vasilevsky, who's healthy as well. You have some very young talent who's very capable of giving the Panthers a run themselves. However, my predictions for both Ottawa and Toronto, I would say that the Ottawa Senators are going to knock out the Leafs in 7 games, where it's going to be the Tampa Bay Lightning going out by the Florida Panthers in 5 games. Let's move on to the Washington Capitals and the Montreal Canadiens series. And as a Montreal Canadiens fan, I really want to see the Montreal Canadiens sweeping the Washington Capitals. But from a realistic point of view, I think this might go 5, if not 5 or 6 games. I want to say it's going to go Montreal's way, but it might just be in Washington's favor. However, for the sake of a Montreal Canadiens fan, I'm going to say that Montreal wins this in 6 games. In terms of the Carolina and New Jersey series, man, I was watching the Montreal Canadiens game for them to clinch that last playoff spot as they were facing off against Carolina last night, and the Carolina Hurricanes commentators would just not stop talking about their matchup with New Jersey. I would have to say that it's going to be a tight series, but I think that Carolina is going to get the best out of this matchup. But nevertheless, you don't want to count New Jersey out. Although I'm not a New Jersey Devils fan, I do have to say that New Jersey has a lot of future in them, considering that they do have Jack Hughes and that he's going to make a very big impact going forward in the first round against Carolina. In terms of the Western Conference, it's going to be the Winnipeg Jets, who obviously claimed that President's Trophy, and they're going to be going up against the St. Louis Blues, who came so close to elimination, but they were just able to get past those Calgary Flames and earn that wild card spot. So, in my opinion, I think that the Winnipeg Jets are going to get past the St. Louis Blues, maybe not by a sweep, but it might be in 5, if not 5, 6 games. I think St. Louis is definitely going to also give Winnipeg a run for their money. In terms of the Dallas-Colorado series, I'd love to see Colorado get past the Stars this season, but I think Dallas is just going to be just too strong of a contender. I think we are going to see maybe 5 or 6 games, if not 7. I think Colorado and Dallas have a very big offensive and defensive core to the pieces of their franchises. However, I think that Dallas might just have a little bit more boost in their self-esteem. So I think overall Dallas will take the series, but I'm rooting for Colorado in that matchup. In terms of the Vegas and Minnesota series, well, we know that Minnesota claimed that first wild card spot ahead of St. Louis, but Vegas, they are a very dominant force. You got to remember that this is an expansion team that has just been at the top of the division every season. I believe there was even one season where they didn't even make the playoffs, but nevertheless, Vegas, I think, is going to get past Minnesota, but Minnesota is not going to go down in a sweep. They're not not going to go down in 5 games. I think this might go even 6 or 7 games, if I'm being honest. And then in terms of the rematch of round 1 series of last year, we had the Los Angeles Kings and the Edmonton Oilers. And man, I have to say, I love both teams, and I'm really stoked to see Edmonton and Los Angeles in the playoffs. And I'm really excited to see these two teams go up against each other in the first round again, and even to see the Los Angeles Kings get home advantage this time after Edmonton got home ice last year. But as an Oilers fan, I can see the Kings getting defeated by Edmonton in maybe 6 games, but I also want to see Los Angeles give their best in this series as well. So for the sake of both of these teams that I love so dearly, I want to see these two teams go to a game 7. I can see the Edmonton Oilers going forward over the Los Angeles Kings, but the Los Angeles Kings, I think they're also going to give a big force to the Edmonton Oilers. Now, the Edmonton Oilers are still out without Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and they haven't been playing Skinner as much. So I think the Edmonton Oilers are going to be quite in a bit of trouble if they don't get their all-stars back on the ice. Now, from what I've heard, McDavid is supposed to be returning back and is supposed to be healthy for the first round of the playoffs. But I think what Edmonton's key game plan is to keep everyone healthy and to just take out the Kings if possible. As for the Los Angeles Kings themselves, well, they are led by a very strong Quinton Byfield on their roster. And let alone, Quinton Byfield is also a former Sudbury Wolf, so I know the potential that he is capable of bringing to this Kings organization. However, I think that the Kings are going to be in a bit of a dogfight with the Oilers, considering that they have somewhat of a tight 50-50 talent on both of their sides of their teams. And so I think what we can expect from both Los Angeles and Edmonton is that they are going to bring us maybe a 6th or a 7th game in the first round. That is just a breakdown of the official NHL bracket for what we have for the 2024-25 season. Who do you think is going to advance to the second round? Who do you think is going to make it to the finals? And who do you think is going to be the 2025 Stanley Cup champion for this season? Let me know. But thanks everyone for tuning into this episode. Really appreciate the support. Be sure to go subscribe over to our YouTube channel, as well as follow us over on Spotify for all of our latest podcast episodes, as well as Bluesky for all of our up-to-date notifications. Thanks, and we'll see you again soon.